Hello and welcome back, everyone. We're going to be talking about the 2024 NRMP charting outcomes, and I'm Vlad of Psych Squared. So let's get started. So what are the charting outcomes? The charting outcomes are a biannual report that's put out by the NRMP. They highlight the qualifications for applicants and how those qualifications kind of lead into the match rate and successes in the match. They look at 10 to 12 different measures. Some of them are the number of ranks that applicants have, the number of specialties that they apply to, the step scores and COMLEX scores, and some additional data like the number of research experiences, publications, work, and volunteer experiences. So one of the biggest questions that people ask every year is psychiatry getting more competitive? So I think the best way to kind of approach this to kind of get a clear answer on this is to see how the trends are in terms of the number of applicants that are applying to psychiatry, and also to look at the scores and research numbers that a lot of the applicants are doing nowadays to match into psychiatry. So without further ado, let's get started and kind of look at some of these trends and numbers. So first off, let's look at the numbers for this past year for 2024. So we'll look at the number of applicants and the number of positions. So in total, there were 2,261 available psychiatry positions. The number of psychiatry applicants was 2,859. So if you're looking at the ratio of applicants per available positions, that number was 1.26. So now let's look at the trend in psychiatry applications. So this graph here shows the number of available positions over the last, let's look here, over the last kind of few years since 2016 all the way to 2024. So you can see that the numbers have been steadily increasing since 2016. Now, if we look at the total number of psychiatry applicants, you can see that number is increasing as well. So the important thing to kind of take into account when seeing these numbers is there is an increase in the number of total psychiatry applicants, but you want to see if the ratio of the number of applicants is higher for the number of available positions that they are. So the best way to kind of look at this data is to kind of look at both the number of available positions and the number of applicants. So you can see this orange line here is the number of total psychiatry applicants. And the blue line below is the number of total psychiatry positions. So you can see that that number has always been above the number of available positions. But if we're looking back at the data since 2016, you can see that this gap has been slowly closing over the last few years. And that's further emphasized here. We're looking at the ratio of psychiatry applicants to positions. So from 2016, you can see that was the highest point in terms of psychiatry applicants to available positions. There was 1.54 applicants per available positions in 2016. And you see that this number has come steadily down to 1.26 now in 2024. So right now is probably the best that it's been in terms of the number of applicants to the number of available positions. So when it comes to the question of psychiatry getting more competitive in terms of applicants, I would say that it is not getting more competitive in terms of the number of people that are interested in psychiatry. That number, as you can see, there is an increase in the amount of applicants towards the specialty, but that demand is kind of being met by the supply of available psychiatry positions that has been steadily increasing in the last few years. So for this graph, we're going to be looking at the number of applicants, but we're going to break it down by the applicant type. So you can see that MD applicant data here from 2016 has been steadily increased. But where we're seeing changes is in this bottom part of the graph. You can see that this bottom part of the graph, we have DO applicants in orange, we have US IMG applicants in green, and in blue, we have non-US IMG applicants. So here you can see that in 2016, there was a very small number of DO applicants, and besides the MD applicants, the other second and third largest number of applicants were the US IMG applicants and the non-US IMG applicants. But as time has gone on, you can see that the number of DO applicants has now surpassed the number of IMG applicants. And the number of IMG applicants for non-US and US IMG applicants is kind of been decreasing over the last few years. And now they're almost identical here in 2024. And we can see that DO applicants has almost doubled it since 2016. And so you can see a lot of the changes in psychiatry in terms of what type of applicants are more interested in the specialty compared to the past. So you can see that that change is more reflected in the DO applicants and IMG applicants. So in total, we're going to look at the 2024 numbers now by applicant type. So we'll be looking at the MD data specifically right now. So for um, the different applicant types, you can kind of skip through to kind of go towards the part of the presentation that's more relevant for you. So we'll be focusing on MD applicant, DO applicant, US IMG and non-US IMG data. Just kind of skip around and go towards the part of the presentation that kind of more applies to you. So we'll start off with the MD data for 2024. So this past year, a total of 1,463 MD applicants applied to the specialty. Now, the match rate for MD applicants was 89.13%, and the unmatched rate was 10.87%. So if we look at the historical kind of data trends of the number of applicants for MD applicants, you can see that number has been slowly increasing since 2016. You can see here that, in 2016 we had about 935, and so now in 2024 we have about 1,463 applicants. And so we look at the number of MD applicants per position. You can see that there was a huge peak in the number of MD applicants that were interested in psychiatry, kind of in the ratio of the number of applicants towards available positions. And that peak was in 2018. And that's actually been kind of steadily decreasing since 2020, is now kind of plateaued since 2022 and 2024 to that ratio being 0.65. So this will be kind of an interesting graph to look at for the match rate percent for MD applicants. So you can see kind of the trend line has been steadily increasing since 2016, but if we kind of hyper focus from the last 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, that can kind of give us a little more relevant data. You can see that the match rate has actually been a little bit lower than it has been in the last 4 years. So in 2020, it was 89.65% of a match rate for MD applicants, and the highest peak that we reached was in 2022 at 92.17%. But now that we have the data for 2024, we can see that that match rate is now the lowest it's been in the last 4 years at 89.13. And that's kind of reflected here as well with the unmatched rate. So you can see we kind of hyper focus in the last 4 years. The non-matched rate has been the highest it's been in the last 4 years at 10.87. So next we'll look at the DO data for 2024. So in 2024, a total of 600 DO applicants applied to the field of psychiatry. The match rate for DO applicants was 81.17%, and the unmatched rate was 18.83%. You can see that these numbers have been also steadily increased, kind of how we saw in that match the number of applicants that have applied to psychiatry and how that number has increased since 2016. So there's been a very large number of DO applicants that are now very interested in the field of psychiatry in the last 4 years. And so you can see that reflected here as well, that for a long time, from 2018 to 2022, there was the amount of new psychiatry positions that were being opened was pretty steady in terms of the number of DO applicants that were interested in the specialty. So that number was hovering around 0.21 in terms of DO applicants that were interested in the field. But as you can see in the last 2 years, there's been a huge increase in the number of DO applicants that are interested in psychiatry now, increasing from 0.21 in 2022 up to 0.27 now in 2024. So that's very heavily reflected here in the huge increase in the number of DO applicants that are now interested in the field of psychiatry. And so we're looking at the match rates for DO applicants. It's kind of a similar trend that we saw in the MD match rate earlier. So you can see historically, there's been an uptrend since 2016 in the match rate, but if we hyper focus in the last 4 years, you can see the match rate's actually been the lowest that it's been since 2020, with 2020 being at 83.42%, with the highest match rate seen for DO applicants in 2022 at just below 87%. And now with 2024, the match rate was 81.17%. So you can see that it's been the lowest that it's been in the last 4 years. And that's reflected here as well with the unmatched rate, with the number of applicants that are going unmatched. That percentage has been pretty high in the last 4 years. It's not as high as in 2018 when the match rate was above 27%. But you can see if we're kind of focusing in the last 4 years, you can see that that's been the highest since 2020. So next we'll look at the IMG data for 2024. So if we look at the US IMG numbers, we had a total of 330 US IMG apply to the field of psychiatry. Their match rate was 53.03%, and the unmatched rate was 46.97%. For non-US IMGs, we had 339 applicants this past year, with the match rate being 51.62% and 48.38% went unmatched. So let's look at the historical trends for this type of applicant. So first, we'll look at the US IMG applicant. So the number of applicants that are US IMG that have been applying to the field of psychiatry has been steadily decreasing since 2016. So you can see in 2016 there was around 446 applicants, and that every year has been steadily decreasing to now 2024. We're seeing the lowest number of US IMGs that are applying to the field. And we can also see that reflected here. We're looking at the ratio of US IMG applicants to available positions. Because as we talked about before, there's been a steady increase in the available positions for people applying to psychiatry, and how that kind of gap has been closing in terms of the number of applicants that are applying and the available positions. And so you can see that 2024 now has historically the lowest number of available positions per IMG applicants. So they're if we look at that ratio of applicants to position, you can see that number is at 0.15 right now, 2024. So now let's look at the match rate for US IMG applicants. And so, we talked about MD and DO applicants and how historically in the last 4 years, this has been the lowest percent match for those two applicant types. But the opposite has been true for the US IMG, overall the IMG applicants. So you can see that in 2024, US IMG applicants have had the highest match rate that they've had since 2016, and this has been steadily increasing in the last years. So you can see that this was a pretty good year for US IMGs with their match rates steadily increasing. And that's kind of reflected here as well with the unmatched rate being the lowest it's ever been since 2016. Now, if we look at non-US IMGs, you can see that it has a similar trend to US IMGs, where there's been a steady decrease in the number of applicants since 2016. But where it differs is that you can see that in 2022, that was the lowest number of non-US IMG applicants that had applied to the field of psychiatry. But you kind of see this new resurgence in 2024 of non-US IMG applicants that are applying to the field of psychiatry. And so, we look at 2016, you can see that overall the number is kind of downtrending. But if we kind of focus on the last 4 years, you can see there was a slight dip in 2022, but now there's the most applicants there have been to the field of psychiatry for non-US IMGs in the last 4 years. And so you can kind of see this trend as well with the number of non-US IMG applicants per position. And so you can see that um, there's been that kind of steady increase since 2022 to 0.15. And so that increase has been slowly happening the last 2 years, and there's even more positions available if you're looking at the ratio of non-US IMG applicants towards the number of available psychiatry positions. And now kind of a similar story to the US IMG match rate. It's the highest match rate that non-US IMG applicants have seen since 2016. That number has almost doubled for them since 2016. And so the good year for non-US IMG applicants in the previous match cycle, with their match rate being at 51.62%. And then you can see the opposite side of the unmatched rate here as well. They've had the lowest unmatched rate since 2016 as well. So overall, the trend seems to be very favorable for non-US IMG applicants in the field of psychiatry. And so now we're going to be breaking down the average stats for applicants that were MD applicants who were able to successfully match in the previous match cycle for 2024. And so you can see for MD applicants, the average number of ranks that they had when they submitted their match list was 11.5. The average MD applicant applied to 1.1 number of specialties. In terms of average step 2 score, the average step 2 score was a 246, with the 25th percentile being 236 and the 75th percentile being 255. On average, MD applicants who matched had 3 research experiences. And in terms of abstract presentations and publications that were kind of lumped together for the statistic, they had an average, MD applicants that matched had an average 7.5 kind of numbers for abstract presentations and publications. So look at the number of ranks that MD applicants had, and you can see that they break it down kind of the percent of applicants that matched and didn't match in terms of the number of ranks that they were able to submit. And so the ranks are just the number of programs that they had interviewed at. And so if you interviewed at 3 programs, you were able to put in 3 ranks. And so you can see that, when you're at the lower end for as an MD applicant, your numbers are really hovering around 30 to 50%. If you have 3 or less ranks to submit, once you start getting into 4, you start seeing your percent chance of matching increase. When you get to 5 to 7 ranks submitted, you are starting to hover around the 80% to 89% of a match rate. And as you get to 8 or higher, you can see that you're above the 90% chance of matching. And that's kind of reflected in this next probability of matching graph here. And you can see that, obviously, as you get more ranks, your probability of matching increases. And so one of the things you'll see kind of asked of applicants as time goes on and, November, December kind of comes around, people will start asking, based on how many interviews they had, how many interviews do I need to match? And so I always really refer people to this graph here. So you can clearly see, if you have around 9 or 10 interviews, you're hovering around a 90% chance of matching. And this kind of plateaus once you get to 12 interviews. You start getting into the 95% chance of matching. And, once you get 13, 14, 15 interviews, it doesn't really go, the chances don't really increase that much. So that's why you can see kind of those average numbers around 11 to 12 of applicants in this previous match cycle that were able to successfully match with around 11.5 ranks. And so we look at the average match data trends. From 2016, applicants were able to match with a number of 9.6 ranks whenever they were applying. And 2022 saw the highest peak with applicants needing just shy of or around 12 interviews to be able to match. And so that's slowly gone down in the last 2 years to 11.5 being the average. So in terms of the number of distinct specialties ranked by USMD applicants, you can see that 90% of applicants only applied to one specialty when they were applying to psychiatry. So psychiatry was the only specialty that they applied to. You can see here that 8% of applicants still applied to psychiatry and another specialty when they applied this past cycle, and 1% had applied to three specialties, with one of them being psychiatry when they applied. So you can kind of see the vast majority of MD applicants are just applying to one specialty. And you can kind of see that this has been a historical trend that MD applicants are usually just applying to one specialty, with that specialty being psychiatry. Since 2016, this number has not changed. Now, if we look at the step 2 scores for US MD seniors, we know that the average was 246 for those that were able to match. So you can see that when applicants are hovering around the 211 to 220, they are at a 65% chance of matching, and then that number steadily increases between 220 to 240. You're going between 81 to 88%, and it's once you break into this 241 score range that your probability goes from 90% to higher. So this kind of overall shows obviously kind of when we think about step 2 scores, the higher you score, the higher chances are. So this kind of helps you visualize percentage-wise where you're at in terms of some of the match data that we have for applicants that applied in this previous cycle. And so you can see here we have a similar graph on the probability of matching compared to your step 2 score. And so you can see as you start to break into the 240 range, your chances start increasing to 90% and higher. And the average was around 246. So, you're hovering around this kind of 95% chance of matching based on your score once you kind of break into that 240, 245 range. And so this can kind of help you orient your application based on the step 2 score that you were able to get recently. And so you can see here the average match data trends for step 2 scores. So you can see in 2016, applicants were able to match with a 238, and that steadily was increasing slowly over the next 2 years. From 2016 to 2018, the average only went up 1 point. From 2018 to 2020, the average only went up 2 points. 2020 to 2022 was only 1 point. And so we've seen a huge jump in the average score needed for psychiatry for psychiatry applicants to match into the field. It's jumped from 242 being the average in 2022 to a 4-point jump in 2024. So whereas before we were seeing a steady increase of half a point to a point a year needed in terms of what score you needed as time went on. And so for there to be a 2-point jump per year, that's kind of an increase in the historical data that we've seen for applicants as they kind of want to keep up with the trends of higher step 2 scores. So this is a very interesting kind of data point to see that the step 2 scores are steadily increasing for psychiatry MD applicants. So now we'll be looking at the number of research projects needed for US MD seniors to match. And so you can see that this ranges from having no research experiences to having 5 or more. And you can see that there's not a very huge contrast between having no research projects where applicants that didn't have any were matched at an 89% match rate, which was very close to the average match rate for psychiatry applicants for MD seniors. And if you have 5 or more, that really only bumped your chances up by 1%. So you want to keep in mind that if you're really investing yourself in doing research projects, you want to do things that you're passionate about, things that are of high quality. You don't want to just do research just to kind of pad your resume, because it doesn't really increase your chances that much. And so you should really be involved with research projects if that's something that you're interested in. If there's topics within the field of psychiatry that you're interested in doing research, that should be kind of the focus of your application as you're getting ready to apply. And so you can see the research experiences haven't increased that much since 2016, with the average being 2.5 in 2016, and that going up to around 3 research experiences in 2020. It peaked in 2022 to 3.4, but now it's kind of downtrended to the lowest number it's been in the last 4 years, to 3. So you can see there hasn't been a huge need in the jump for research in the field of psychiatry for MP applicants, at least. And so now we'll look at the section that they dedicate for abstracts, presentations, and publications. So you can see that the numbers of applicants that match and didn't match, if you didn't have any abstracts or presentations, your match rate was around 79%. And that really kind of was true for having 0 to 1. When you had about 2 or more, your chances increase about 10% to around the 87 to 91 range, and just about 4% bump once you get to the 5 or more range. So in terms of kind of, if you're thinking about research experiences and then thinking about the number of abstracts or presentations, you can kind of use these numbers to gauge, how much of a increase in my percent of matching will actually affect my overall application cycle. And so you can kind of, use these metrics to help guide you in those decisions. So you can see the average number has been increasing since 2016. So we didn't really see the same trend with the number of research experiences, but you can see that the number or the output of abstracts and presentations and publications has been increasing. So there is that kind of distinction between the number of experiences and how productive you are with those experiences as well. So you can see in 2016, the average was 3.7, and that's almost doubled now to 2024, with a very steady, very huge increase since 6.2 in 2022. So you can see that if you are in these kind of research experiences as an MD applicant, you can see that the output average has been increasing for MD applicants over the last 4 years. And so now we're going to shift over to looking at the match data for DO applicants. So on average, the DO applicants that were able to match had an average of 9.9 ranks or interviews that they submitted. They applied, the average number of specialties applied to was 1.2. The average complex level 2 scores was 525, and the average step 2 score was a 240, with the 25th percentile being at 233, and the 75th percentile being at 250. In terms of research experiences, the average applicant had 2.1, and for abstract presentation publications, the average match DO applicant had 3.8. You can see here the number of the match rates and unmatched rates for applicants and the number of ranks or interviews that they had. And so you can see, as you're around the 1 to 4, you're hovering between 30s to 50s, 60%. When you get to 5, you're at around 67%. And it's really when you start getting into the 6 to probably 10 interviews, you start to break into the 80% range. And then once you get to 11 interviews or higher, you're really 90% or higher at a chance of matching into the field of psychiatry. And so we have a graph here for probability of matching. And so you can refer to this as the season goes on, and you ask yourself, how many interviews do I need to match? And so you can see that around the 10 to 11 mark, you start to break into this 90% chance of matching. Once you get into 12 or 13 interviews, you kind of see diminishing returns in terms of having more interviews. So you see you kind of hit that 95% chance of matching, and it just kind of slowly increases as you get more interviews. And so in terms of DO applicants and the number of interviews that they needed to match, in 2016, the average DO applicant needed about 8.5 interviews to be able to match successfully. And that number has only very slightly increased in the last kind of 4 years. You can see that it's only gone from 9.7 to 9.9. So there hasn't been a huge need for DO applicants to have more interviews historically in the last 4 or so years. And now for DO applicants, the 78% of DO applicants apply to one specialty only, with that specialty being psychiatry, you can see that 19% of applicants that were DOs applied to dual applied when they applied in this last match cycle. So you can see about one in five applicants is applying to two specialties when they're applying to psychiatry, and around 3% applied to three specialties, with one of them being psychiatry. And so you can see that in 2016 and 2018, DO applicants are really only applying to one specialty, and that's kind of been increasing in the last 4 years. You can see that in 2020, that number was also 1.2. It kind of peaked in 2022 to 1.3. But now we're seeing 1.2 again in 2024. So you can see about one in fifth applicants are now dual applying when they're planning to apply to the field of psychiatry. As you can see the overall match and non-match rates for the complex level 2 scores here. And you can see as you kind of hit the 450 to 500 range, your chances are increasing from the 50s all the way to the high 70s. And then once you break into the 500s, you're really going into an 80% or higher chance. And so you can kind of map it with this probability of matching as well, reducing your level 2 score to kind of see what you need to kind of be around the 90% chance of matching. You can see that's just shy of the 600 mark for the complex level 2 scores. And so if you're looking at the data trend for the level 2 scores in 2016, you can see it's been downtrending. And in 2016, you needed a 533 to be able to match as a DO applicant, and now we're seeing the lowest numbers needed for those scores for DO applicants, with 525 being the average in 2024. And so now we can look at the step 2 scores for US DO seniors, and you can see that when you're between a 211 to just below 230, you're around the 60 to 70% chance of matching. Once you break into the 230, you're going into an 80% chance of matching, and then breaking into the 240s, you really increase your chance significantly, almost 15% increase in your chances of matching in the field of psychiatry. And so the opposite is true compared to the complex level 2 score for DO applicants. There's been this uptrend in the need in the average step 2 score for DO applicants, with 237 in 2018, and an increase in one average point in 238, and then seeing that there's kind of this dip in 2022 to 236, and now an increase of almost 4 points in the need to match for DO applicants. So it's kind of the same trend that we saw in the MD applicants, where we've seen in the last 2 years there was a 2 point increase in the average every year. So we can see that the same is true for DO applicants, with the 240 being the average now in 2024. So here we have the match rates for the research experiences for DO seniors, and you can see that the numbers hover between the high 70s to mid 80s. So just kind of focusing on quality research, if you are interested in doing research. I think the numbers that will help you kind of decide how much research to get involved in will be the slide after this one. And you can see that these research experiences have been kind of uptrending from the average being 1.4 to 2.1 now in 2024. But if you look at the last 4 years, that number hasn't really increased. It's only gone from 2 to 2.1 and kind of hovered there in the last 4 years. So I think this data point will be the most helpful for DO applicants to see if they need to be getting more involved in abstract and presentations and publications to have a more successful match with a DO applicant. And so you can see that the match rate for DO applicants that didn't have any of these three themes was 70%. But one of the things I wanted to highlight with this graph, that when you had one or more research items in terms of abstracts or presentations or publications, your chances of matching increased to 84%. And so you can see that kind of investing in at least having one research item on your application can really change really change your chances of matching by increasing it to about more than 14% when you're approaching the match cycle. So it's one thing that I would consider to at least try to dedicate yourself in the if you're in the final year or you're early on in your medical school career to at least dedicate yourself to at least doing one abstract or one presentation because you can see that it really significantly increases your chances of matching as a DO applicant. You can see the data trend has been increasing, not just from 2016, but especially from 2020. You can see that the average in 2020 was 3.1, but now we've seen an increase to almost 3.8. That's a very huge jump in the need of DO applicants to be more involved with abstracts and presentations and publications compared to the last 4 years. So now we'll switch over to looking at US IMG applicant match data. So we'll see that the US IMG applicant that successfully matched had an average of 5.7 interviews. They applied to 1.5 specialties. Their average step 2 scores were an average of 231, with the 25th percentile being a 223 and the 75th percentile being a 245. On average, they had 2.2 research experiences, and in terms of abstract presentation and publications, the average number was 3.4. So you can see that if you're looking at the number of interviews needed to match, you can see that you're hovering around the 30 to 50% chance of matching when you have 1 to 4 interviews. There's almost a 20% increase in those that were able to have 5, and then you can really see a huge increase when US IMG applicants were able to have more than 5 interviews. You can see the chances of matching increase significantly in that scenario. So here we have a little bit of a spoiler for our non-US IMG applicants that we'll talk about later, but we'll focus right now for US IMGs. So you can see that once you get into the 90% chance of matching, you're around, let's see, around 9 to 10 interviews here. And so this kind of follows the trend that we've seen for MD and DO applicants, but you can see that the average applicant had around 5.7. You can see your chances really start to increase once you start breaking into having 6 or more interviews. And this has been a trend that's been kind of going up and down and slowly uptrending in the last year since 2016. We're kind of hyper focusing in since 2020. You can see that was the lowest number of interviews that applicants needed as US IMGs in applying to the field of psychiatry. It was at 5.4. It peaked to the highest in 2022 and now has come back down to 5.7. So that's where we're at in terms of the number of interviews needed for US IMGs in the last kind of 4 years, and specifically for this past year now being at 5.7. And so when we're looking at the number of specialties that US IMG applicants apply to, 62% applied just to the field of psychiatry. But we see almost 1 in 4 applicants dual applied, and 8% of applicants applied to 3 specialties. And so you can see this number has been uptrending since 2016. From 2016 to 2020, that number was pretty stable at 1.4, but that has increased in the last 2 years with the average number of specialties applied to has increased to 1.5 for US IMGs in 2022. So now looking at step 2 scores, you can see that if you're in the 211 to 230 range, you're hovering around the 50%, 230 to 240 bumps you up to around the 10% increase in around the 60s. And then 241 was around 60 as well, and with 251 having a 100% match rate success, but with the data being a little more skewed because there's less data for those ranges as well. So I think this next graph will be a lot more helpful to kind of help you see what the probability of matching will be as a US IMG. You can see that once you start getting the 240s range, you're increasing your chances around 75%. And then we're looking at kind of the non-US IMG as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You can see that to kind of have that same result, you're kind of having to score much higher, around the above 260. And so we'll look at the historical match data trend for step two averages for US IMG applicants. And so we've seen it increase over, the years in 2016, but if we hyper focus on the last 4 years, the average was 226, which was the lowest that it was ever needed to match into the field psychiatry at the US IMG. But the average scores have been increasing significantly in the last 4 years for US IMGs. It's been a 5-point increase since 2020. And so the average now is at 231 to be able for the average to successfully match in the field of psychiatry, the US IMG. And so for research projects, you can see that these numbers hover around 54 to 60s in terms of having no research projects, or 1 to 4 or 5 or more. And these numbers have kind of plateaued in the last 4 years. It's with 2.3 in 2020, 2022, but that average now being just slightly lower at 2.2 in 2024. But this is usually the data that I found the most helpful in terms of your research output, in terms of abstract, presentation, and publications. You can see your chance of matching was around 52%, which was around the average for US IMG. You can see that your chances really increase about 10% if you have at least one research item on your application. So you can see your numbers jump up once you have one to around 61%, and then it's 67%, 59%, 54%. And so you can see that you get that kind of increase in your chances of applying. If you have at least one research item on your application, and you want to make sure it's a quality research item. Again, you don't want to do research just for the sake of padding your resume, but you want to do things that you're passionate about and things that will be of high quality when applying. And you can see that these numbers haven't really been increasing for US IMGs in the last 4 years. It was around 3.8, 3.9, and that number has actually gone down now to the average being 3.4 in 2024 for US IMG applicants. And so we'll look at the average match data for non-US IMG applicants. So the number of interviews that non-US IMG applicants had was 6.6 that matched. The number of specialties applied to was 1.3. The step two score average was a 240, with the 25th percentile being at 229 and the 75th percentile being at 250. On average, the applicants had a 4.6 research experiences, and the number of abstract presentation publications was very high at 8. So you can see the chances of matching are very low if you have about 3 or less interviews. Once you start to have 4 and 5, you're around the 50% range. When you get into the 6 and 7, you start really increasing your chances to around the 70 and 80% chance of matching. And that's reflected in here in the graph we saw previously, where you can see your chances of having a 90% chance of matching around the 11 to 12 mark. So you can kind of use this graph to refer to when you're in the interview season and you have an X amount of interviews, and you're kind of wondering what your chances are of matching with those. With those number of interviews on your in your match cycle. And so historical trends for non-US IMGs and the number of interviews that they've needed or on average have had when they've matched has gone up from 5.1 in 2016 to 6.6 in 2024. That number has been steadily increasing since 2020 in the last 4 years. We've gone from 5.8 to 6.1 in 2022, and then 6.6 now in 2024. So you see that you're seeing the numbers here show that non-US IMG applicants are needing more interviews on average to be able to match into the field of psychiatry. And so this shows the number of specialties that were applied to by non-US IMGs. So 75% of applicants that were non-US IMGs applied to just one specialty, to just psychiatry, and then 1 in 5 applicants dual applied when it came to psychiatry and another specialty, and then 5% applied to 3 specialties. And this number has kind of been going up and down in terms of how many specialties non-US IMG applicants have applied to. And so this number was at 1.2 in 2016, and it's really only gone up to 1.3 in 2024. It's kind of gone up to 1.4, then back to 1.3, and kind of just repeated this cycle up until 2024. So the numbers have been kind of pretty steady since 2018 in terms of how many specialties applicants that are non-US IMG need to apply to when applying to the field of psychiatry. So for non-US IMG, here we're seeing the step 2 scores and the percent match rates based on those scores. You can see when you're around the 211 to 220 mark, you're hovering around the 37% chance of matching. That kind of goes up about 10% when you're in the 220 to 240 range, and there's a huge jump from the 40s to 70% chance once you break into that 240 range. So for non-US IMGs, you can see that 240 range really changes your chances of, or increases your chances of matching when applying to the field of psychiatry. And kind of using the same graph as before, you can kind of plot around how much these step 2 scores will help increase your chances of matching based on what score you're able to get. And so if we're looking at the averages, there has been an increase for applicants that are non-US IMG as well. So the average you can see in 2016 was 228. There's been almost a 12-point increase since then. The last 4 years, you can see that the average has gone up about 5 points since 2020, where it was at 235, and now at 2024, where the average to match is around 240. So you can see that's kind of been a historical trend across a lot of specialties where the averages have been really increasing lately to be able to match in the field of psychiatry. And so now going into research projects, you can see that it's kind of a similar trend for the other applicant types, but you're seeing match rates that are pretty steady across the board. So when you're approaching joining or starting research projects, you really want to do things that are high quality and things you're passionate about. You can see that these numbers have actually increased significantly for non-US IMG applicants. In 2016, that number was at 2.5, and it's almost doubled now at 2024. Specifically in the last 4 years, the number has really increased from 2.9 to 4.6. So it's been a huge increase in the last 4 years of research experiences that are done by applicants that are non-US IMG that have been able to match. And so now when we're looking at the number of abstracts and presentations and publications for non-US IMGs, you can see that this number is pretty kind of hovering around the 48% to 60%. And so one of the things that will help us kind of gauge how much to do will be this graph where you can kind of see the numbers have been slowly uptrending since 2016. If you look at the last 4 years, that was the lowest number that was ever needed for non-US IMGs to match. It was around 5.5, and that was the lowest peak. That number peaked very high in 2022, with the number being 9.1 in terms of abstract presentation publications that were needed. Now it's gone down by a whole number down in 2024, so it's been slowly decreasing for non-US IMGs. So in conclusion, when we looked at the number of applicants to positions, it seems that there's more positions per applicant that there have been in the past. So in terms of thinking, is psychiatry getting more competitive? I think from that point of view, I don't think that the number of applications are really changing the field of psychiatry. There definitely are more applicants that are applying to psychiatry, but there has also been an increase in the supply of available positions. And so we're actually at some of the lowest numbers in terms of the ratio of applicants to available positions. Now, when thinking of psychiatry being more competitive, we can look at scores and research averages. And we've seen that those have actually increased in the last 4 years. You can see for a lot of the applicant types, the step 2 scores were traditionally the averages were increasing about a point a year to kind of keep up with the historical trends. That's actually increased in the last 4 years to an increase in about 2 points in the average. So we are seeing that scores and research numbers have been increasing in the last 4 years. And from that point of view, psychiatry is getting more competitive in that sense. And so hopefully this data really helps to orient you as you're getting ready to apply in the next month and submit your ERAS application and really see the type of applicant that you will be in the upcoming match cycle and to really help you kind of understand and approach the cycle better. So just kind of some last minute updates. So we're going to have our upcoming workshop in September. This is going to help prepare you for interviews and to really know what to expect when you're really in the thick of the application season. Let us know if you haven't received any of our emails and updates. We recently put out the 2024 survey director results. So if you hadn't gotten an email from us or haven't really gotten information from that, let us know and we'll make sure that you guys are in the loop for information for the upcoming interview workshop that we're going to do. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have any questions, contact us on our different platforms. We're on Instagram at Psych Squared. You'll be seeing this video on YouTube. So feel free to leave a comment there if you have any questions or email us here at our Gmail with any questions you may have after this presentation. So hopefully this helped and good luck with the upcoming cycle and let us know if you have any questions.